I'm gonna keep this short and sweet. It's been a while since I made a proper video on my channel, and I wanted to come back with something that I can be proud of after all the time away, so here I am. I enjoyed writing this script up and recording it, and I hope you do too, but for now, back to the video. So the first Descendant released about 2 weeks or so ago at the time of recording this video, and I have had my fair share of playtime through the campaign, and to say the least, it's had its ups and downs, and I'm rather mixed on the game, but I'm sad to say that it's mostly been full of downers so far, and that's considering I haven't even finished the story yet. However, I will say that for an almost one-to-one Warframe clone, going against the absolute beast that is Warframe, pushing on more than a decade in its lifespan, and still going strong, the first Descendant may be worth sticking with for a while. That is, if developer Nexon can make the most of the solid foundation that they've laid for a potentially successful long-term live service, which is quite the rarity to see nowadays, especially for a free-to-play title. At first glance, the first Descendant seems like a strange mishmash of Destiny, Anthem, and Warframe, but once I actually got my hands on the game, even though it very clearly takes aspects and concepts from each of these games, it definitely feels the most like Warframe, of course, only lacking the fluid mobility and control that Digital Extremes have given us over the years. Unfortunately, this is to its detriment. The gameplay will mostly be compared to Warframe as the benchmark for this kind of looter shooter, so if you're coming to the first Descendant expecting a Warframe-esque experience, then you will be sorely disappointed, which is a shame, as the game, in my opinion, offers a much more grounded take on the Warframe formula, while still retaining the same core features. The experience that the first Descendant offers feels like a much more watered down version of Warframe's, which can be considered as both a positive and negative. Descendants are essentially Warframes, each one having their own unique set of 4 abilities that cater to a certain playstyle, such as Bunny, being an agile ad clearer with strong AoE capabilities, revolving around the concept of constantly moving to build up an electric charge that can be used to activate her abilities, or Ajax basically being a Titan from Destiny, being able to place down barriers and bubbles to protect his teammates. While I only have experience with these 2 Descendants so far, and looking at the others for future farming, I can say that they all have a decent amount of variety and mostly offer different playstyles, with more to come as teased by Nexon. There's not much I can really say about each character sadly, since it's still a complete grind to even get one, but I have high hopes. One other thing that I'd like to add is that the designs for each character just look cool to me, even if some of the names don't suit the world because of how generic they are, like Kyle and Greg and genetically enhanced Greg. But a few personal favourites of mine have to be Bunny, Sharon and Blair, and I'll give Nexon credit for having a relatively unique and not generic character designs in my opinion. Aside from the Descendants themselves, there is of course a large arsenal for us to chase throughout the game, and at least there is a diverse offering of weapons from assault rifles, submachine guns, hand cannons, rocket launchers, the list goes on, where 3 at a time can be equipped with no restrictions unlike Destiny and Warframe, so if you wanted to run 3 heavy weapons at a time or 3 scout rifles, then be my guest. I'm more of a traditional player however, 1 primary, 1 special and 1 heavy, but even with the freedom given in making your own loadout and the sheer amount of loot that the game drowns you in from the get-go, it feels like there's not much incentive to use one weapon over the other, even with perfectly rolled substats. Each gun is given a DPS value which can be easily enhanced with modules, exactly like Warframe mods, but there isn't much of a sense of build crafting, and it mostly just boils down to big number equals big damage. So whatever has the highest DPS value, that is most likely the gun that you'll equip until the next gun with a higher DPS value drops. For clarification, this is what it seems to be like from where I am in the campaign right now. The Agnar Desert for those wondering, sorry if I butchered that name, but it could change in the endgame, correct me if I'm wrong. Each gun feels decently powerful, but there's always some instances of my guns feeling like they're just slapping enemies with wet paper, but that just seems to be a more widespread issue surrounding third-person shooters. But what I feel is lacking most is something to chase, something that defines the meta, like getting a god roll edge transit in Destiny. And I don't feel excited when something new drops like I do with Destiny. It's either a gun to be scrapped immediately, or if the damage is slightly better, I'll mod it up and put it on. I can't say for sure, but this probably affects the state of the current endgame, because it looks like there isn't much of one right now, and I think having something to pursue on hard difficulty may be the way to go in the future. What truly allows build crafting in a looter shooter are mods. Mods that can be applied to a weapon, character, or piece of armor, such as with Destiny and Warframe, and modules are only the first Descendant's variation of those systems. But it is exactly the same as Warframe, which feels familiar to me but also a little uninspired. But don't fix what ain't broke, I guess. For those of you who aren't well versed with how the first Descendant handles this, each weapon and Descendant are given a certain capacity that can be upgraded over time to allow for more modules to be equipped. And speaking of which, modules have a dedicated amount of capacity that they take up, labeled with the big number on top of them. Very hard to miss. With more valuable modules costing more. These modules can be enhanced for greater effect, but they also end up costing more in return, so there's some level of management that has to be taken into account. Now, I do have a few things to say about this system, as it's a bit lackluster in my eyes, as opposed to Warframe's, but again, it can be changed in the future if Nexon does act on it. First of all, it's a little restrictive in the sense that there's not much room for actual build crafting, other than increasing the damage of a gun and maybe giving it a status effect such as fire or chill. And there's no synergy between modules and elements, since you can only equip one elemental mod at a time, since there's no combinations to be made like Warframe, with corrosion as an example being a byproduct of having toxin and electricity mods in a singular weapon. However, there are ultimate modules that almost act as pseudo-exotic perks like Destiny, as only one can be used at a time. But from the ones that I have earned, they only seem to fit a certain playstyle or character, like Venom Injector, which has been sitting in my inventory for days because I can really only take advantage of it if I use Freyna, who I don't have. For Descendants, there are the general mods that can increase skill power, health, shield, etc. But there are also ultimate modules that give better effects than their legendary counterparts, like weapons, but these add more to the neutral game, which is welcome. One that I have is Insulated Conductor, and it makes me completely immune to electrocution, which is a nice buff overall, but it doesn't have much use to me right now. Descendants also have a unique type of module, which is like an exotic intrinsic trait, which are called Transcendent modules. They seem to enhance the playstyle of a Descendant as a whole, but the drop rates for these are abysmal, and I've only gotten one for Esimo, sorry if I also butchered that name, who I also don't have though, so I can't say too much about them for now other than what's obvious to me. All in all though, there's a lot to experiment with Descendants, but with the lack of synergy with modules in general, from what I can tell so far, opinion is subject to change. It doesn't really allow me to be creative in the ways that I want. Now, I can't exactly say much for the story other than it's just boring, which is the general consensus for the first Descendants campaign. I must admit, I wasn't going into the campaign with high expectations, looking for a Game of the Year worthy narrative, but it's still somewhat disappointing that for a game that has promise and potential to have great stories be told, it feels like there wasn't much of an effort to actually tell an interesting and cohesive story, and I'm no writer, mind you. It's filled with the usual random sci-fi jargon thrown about like we're supposed to know what these things are, like the Iron Heart and Dimensional Wall, while we're slowly ushered around the various locations so that Descendants can also be gradually introduced. But at the same time, each character feels as if they have no personality or unique traits about them. It looks like Bunny is the only one who has some semblance of character development and an arc to go through with her exclusive quest about her parents. But Nexon has said that there will be more to come, so hopefully more Descendants will get their time in the limelight. But back to the main story. There's nothing really to hook me into the narrative, and honestly, I ended up just skipping most dialogue and skimming through subtitles to get a general idea of what's going on, since it was and still is a complete yap fest. This isn't helped as each area on the world map follows the same structure as each other. Talk to character in area, complete the same copy and paste missions over and over again, move to next area, rinse and repeat, with a small dungeon operation either in the middle and end of each region, but there's no real set pieces or story beats to get attached to. The game does suffer with the sheer repetitiveness of the campaign structure, and really I'm just forcing myself to push through the absolute slog of the story, which I'm sure that those who have already completed the game can relate to. What I will say is a standout for me personally are the Void Intercept battles at the end of every story region, which pits us against a Colossus type enemy which functions as a raid boss in a sense, a large target for us to blow our load on. The first few were decently challenging, but the difficulty really ramped up with the Dead Bride and Devourer. who hit like absolute trucks and had real mechanics to watch out for. But in my opinion, the Devourer's healing is a little unfair, especially on the first few attempts. The cutscenes, I would say, are also stunning in Unreal Engine 5, making this game feel somewhat next-gen compared to other titles we've seen released. And the few action scenes that make an appearance are well choreographed in my opinion, and sometimes make me forget that I have to go back to completing the same checklist activities again. But having these small highlights in an otherwise dismal campaign isn't enough to keep most playing until the endgame. But hopefully Nexon can start to pick up the pace with the narrative in future expansions, if they do decide to go down that route, seeing the potential that this world has to offer. And I think they will. I have touched upon some of my gripes in previous sections, but now for the elephant in the room. Monetization. This is perhaps my main gripe with the first Descendant, among many others, but this stands out to me the most, and I'm sure the vast majority of you will agree with me. It just bewilders me that some aspects of the game are monetized at all, which are core to the looter shooter experience, but as a Warframe player, it's much of the same, but it's still very annoying to see. I'm all for having cosmetics and everything that falls under that umbrella be monetized, but when you are charging to expand the player's inventory when the base size is downright abysmal, mine is currently 82 slots, and let me tell you that it fills up over the span of a few missions, which is practically nothing. And since we're drowning in loot throughout the campaign, and I've hit a point plenty of times where I just have to sit down and scrap so many weapons and components, because they also share inventory space by the way, to make room for more, and the purchase slots button sits comfortably underneath your gear in the hopes that you'll give in and buy more, so that you can at least hold the equipment that you've earned. But that's not all. The Postmaster is also monetized for slots, so if that fills up and you don't want to buy any slots, then say goodbye to any loot you already can't carry in your inventory. And that's still not all, since the Vault is also monetized in the same way. Imagine if Bungie charged players for Vault slots in Destiny 2. How outrageous it would be, and I'm surprised no one's brought any attention to this yet. But there's also one more thing that baffles me, and that's how the player's consumable inventory is also capped. But there's no way to scrap materials or blueprints, so eventually when that fills up, there's no way to expand it further than buying Caliber to buy more slots. Of course, I'm giving worst case scenarios for this kind of monetization. I'm sure nobody's hit these caps yet, except for the base inventory. I haven't myself, except for weapons and components, but my vault is starting to get there as I stash more ultimate components and weapons with good substats. But I have a feeling that it'll get there at some point, which obviously will lead to complaint and discourse. I will give Nexon credit, as it looks like they are listening to player feedback, and they've already expanded the module inventory by 500 slots, which is a start, but it comes into question how far they will listen to feedback and make changes. Egregious monetizations such as the ones present in the first Descendant really do confuse me, but after all, this is a free-to-play title and we are in the era of modern gaming. Maybe this could be alleviated with a trading system down the line for the premium currency like Warframe, since the game takes most aspects from it already. I do have another gripe besides monetization though, and that is the RNG, which is a blatant lie from what the game tells you. Character parts may say 20%, so you would think that it would only take 5 runs max to get the thing that you want with basic maths, right? Well, I wouldn't be saying this if it was 20%. You would be more inclined to believe that it's actually an 80% chance to not get the part, which makes more sense. There's also the Amphimus materials, which are just the Warframe relics where you have to complete void intercepts to open them, but then again, there's a random chance to get something out of the 5-6 items inside of it, and the rarest items only have a 3% chance of dropping, which probably is actually true in this circumstance, but I did get lucky once, and got an ultimate bunny piece first try. I wouldn't be surprised if these false drop rates were real, since apparently Nexon got into a lawsuit not too long ago about altering rates in one of their other games, but I won't get too deep into that now. The first Descendant absolutely does not respect your time and investment, but this isn't exactly new, unless you want to drop more than £80 for ultimate characters of course. All in all, the first Descendant is quite the decisive game in my eyes, where on one hand there is a game that is worth experiencing, But on the other hand, that game is completely buried under 50 layers of monotony, a splash of unoriginality, a dabble of bad RNG, and heaps of utterly shameless monetization. But what I will say is that Nexon have been listening to player feedback for now, and have been changing some aspects already, like with the module inventory size. And 2 new Descendants have already been announced with the likes of Luna and Ultimate Valby, along with dungeons that are going to be added later down the line. But I think the game would benefit from getting them out sooner. I would like to see how a trading system of sorts would shake up the economy, but I'm not sure if that would be implemented so soon since the game seems to be making bank off of skins and ultimate characters so far. But the first Descendant is certainly full of potential, and maybe, just maybe, it'll create its own community just like Warframe, and maybe it'll thrive over the next few years. But that could be said for most live service free-to-play games. We can only wait and see. But me personally, I would like to see this game succeed, but it definitely is just Warframe, but also not Warframe at the same time. It does have other things going for it, like Descendants, but there's not a lot in some cases. It feels like there could be more to be done to make the game feel more original other than borrowing most features of Warframe. But hey, I'm no game dev. I only covered what I think are the major points worth talking about in-game with what I have seen so far, since this is only my first impressions. But that's what I think about the first Descendant right now. And most of all, I wanted to thank you all for watching my first scripted video. I had a lot of fun making this, also thanks to my friends for helping me with writing this script, and I would gladly do it again if you guys want to see this kind of content in the future. Let me know in the comments and so on. I would like to mark this as a start for me branching out further than just Let's Plays, but we'll see how it turns out. It's good to be back though. Like and subscribe, the usual stuff. See ya.